Did you know that when you call something a blockbuster, you're talking about a bomb? And or that the Jeep in your garage might be named after a cartoon character? The biggest war in history didn't just change borders and governments. It changed our words, it left its mark on the way we speak every single day in ways we don't even notice. Millions of people were thrown together from different places, facing things no one had ever faced before. They needed new words for new feelings, new machines, and new kinds of fear. They invented a language on the fly. A language of survival, of dark humor, of getting the job done. That language didn't stay on the battlefield. It came home with the soldiers, sailors, and airmen. It seeped into newspapers, then movies, then into our kitchens and offices. We think we're just talking, but are we? Or are we speaking in the ghosts of old orders, forgotten machines, and the inside jokes of a generation that saved the world? How many echoes of that global conflict are hiding in your daily conversations? What stories are you telling without even knowing it? It's number 20. What does your t-shirt have in common with a soup can? The term is GI. Today, we think of a GI as a soldier. G.I. Joe, the all-American hero. But it didn't start that way. It wasn't about a person at all. It was about stuff. GI stood for government issue, or maybe galvanized iron. The exact origin is a little hazy, which is common for slang. The point is, it was a label stamped on everything the military handed out. Canteens, helmets, rifles, shovels. Even the galvanized steel trash cans were stamped GI. It was a mark of ownership. This belongs to Uncle Sam. Imagine being a young soldier. Everything you own, everything you use to stay alive is stamped with these two letters. Your gear is GI. Your uniform is GI. The food you eat is GI. After a while, you start to feel like you are GI too. Just another piece of government-issued equipment. It was a joke at first. A dark one. It captured the feeling of being a tiny interchangeable part in a massive impersonal machine. The military strips away your name and gives you a number. It takes your clothes and gives you a uniform. It's not a surprise that the label for its equipment became the label for its people, but then something interesting happened. The term changed. Soldiers started calling themselves GIs. They took this impersonal, dehumanizing label and made it their own. It became a badge of honor. A GI wasn't just any soldier. A GI was a specific kind of soldier, an American soldier. Tough, resourceful, maybe a little cynical, but always ready to get the job done. The famous wartime cartoonist Bill Malden helped cement this image. His characters, Willie and Joe, were dirty, exhausted, dog-faced GIs. They complained about the officers and the rain, but they were the heart and soul of the army. Malden's cartoons, which earned him a Pulitzer Prize in 1945, showed the world the reality of the GI experience. He made the GI a real person, not just a label on a crate. After the war, the term exploded into civilian life. The most important reason was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. We know it today as the GI Bill. This law was a promise to the millions of returning GIs. It gave them money for college, low-interest loans for homes and businesses. It was one of the most transformative pieces of legislation in American history. Nearly 8 million veterans used the GI Bill's education benefits. It built the American middle class, and every time someone talked about it, they used the term I. It was no longer just a word for a soldier. It was a word for a veteran, a citizen, a homeowner, a college graduate. The label for a thing had become the name for a hero and then the name for a dream. Why did a term for an inanimate object become a symbol of national identity and pride? How many other words have we repurposed from a place of cynicism to a place of honor? What does it say about the human spirit that we can take a label meant to erase our individuality and turn it into a symbol of our shared experience? Number 19, are you just missing or have you disappeared? The word is AWOL. It's an acronym, absent without leave. In today's world, we use it casually. A coworker doesn't show up for a meeting, and someone jokes, looks like Dave's gone AWOL. A teenager stays out past curfew, and a parent mutters about them being AWOL. It means someone is missing when they're supposed to be somewhere. It's a handy, sharp-sounding shorthand, but its origins are anything but casual. In the military, AWOL is a specific crime. It's not the same as desertion. Desertion means you leave, and you have no intention of ever coming back. AWOL is a temporary state. You're absent from your post, but you haven't been formally dropped from the rolls. The distinction is crucial, but the consequences are still severe. During the Second World War, the pressures on soldiers were immense. Combat fatigue, which we would now recognize as PTSD, was rampant. News from home could be devastating. A soldier might get a letter saying his wife was sick or his farm was failing. The temptation to just walk away for a few days could be overwhelming. The military bureaucracy had to track every single person. The number of personnel listed as AWOL was a constant concern for commanders. It affected unit readiness and morale. According to U.S. Army records from the period, the rates of absenteeism were a significant logistical and disciplinary problem. For every soldier who went AWOL, a chain of paperwork and investigation was triggered. Was he captured? Was he wounded and lost? Or did he just walk off? The uncertainty was a corrosive force. The writer James Jones, in his classic novel From Here to Eternity, which is set in the Army right before the Pearl Harbor attack, captures the intense, rule-bound world where a concept like AWOL could define a man's fate. When the war ended, the term came home. It was short, punchy, and easy to understand. It filled a gap in the language. Before, you might say someone was playing hooky or skipping out, but AWOL sounded more serious, more official. It had a hint of military discipline behind it, which made it perfect for both serious and ironic use. It spread through popular culture, appearing in movies and books about the war, and then just about everything else. It became disconnected from its original life or death context. This process of trivialization is fascinating. A term that could mean prison time or worse for a soldier in 1944 is now a lighthearted way to talk about missing a meeting. We've kept the letters but thrown away the weight. Why do we so easily adopt the language of crisis for our mundane problems? Does using a term like AWOL so casually dishonor the real fear and desperation that led soldiers to commit the act? What other military legal terms are we using without any idea of their original serious meanings? Number 18, are you aiming or are you a target? The phrase is in the crosshairs. We use it to describe being the focus of intense scrutiny or criticism. A politician is in the crosshairs of the media. A company is in the crosshairs of regulators. It means you are a target. You're being watched, judged, and are potentially in danger of being attacked. It's a powerful metaphor for being under pressure. The origin is brutally literal. The crosshairs are the fine lines, wires, or etched markings in a telescopic sight on a rifle or a bomb sight on an airplane. When an enemy soldier, a tank, or a factory is centered in those crosshairs, it is the target. The next step is pulling the trigger or releasing the bomb. There is no metaphor here. It is a direct and immediate precursor to destruction. During the war, this was a technological reality for millions. Snipers, pilots, bombardiers, and tank gunners spent hours staring through scopes, placing people and places in their crosshairs. For them, it was a technical procedure, the final step in a deadly equation. The technology of the telescopic sight was refined significantly during the war. There's companies like Lyman and Weaver in the United States, and manufacturers in Germany and the Soviet Union produced millions of scopes. These optical devices allowed for a level of accuracy that was previously unimaginable in standard infantry combat. A sniper could engage a target from hundreds of yards away. The crosshairs made this possible. They turned a distant, anonymous figure into a precise target. The war correspondent Ernie Pyle wrote about the chilling efficiency of snipers and the psychological terror they inflicted. Being in an area with a sniper meant you could be in someone's crosshairs at any moment, and you would never know it. After 1945, the phrase began to migrate into civilian language. It was too potent a metaphor to be left behind. The idea of being targeted, of being precisely and deliberately singled out, was something everyone could understand. And political columnists and reporters started using it. A 1948 article might describe a senator being in the crosshairs of an opponent. It quickly became a staple of political and business journalism. The literal meaning of impending death was softened into a figurative meaning of impending trouble. It's strange how we've adopted this image. We talk about it almost casually without thinking of the violent reality it represents. We've taken the viewpoint of the person looking through the scope, the one with the power, and applied it to situations of social or professional conflict. The person in the crosshairs is the victim, the target. The phrase frames conflict in the starkest possible terms as a hunt. What does it say about our culture that our go-to metaphor for scrutiny is a tool for killing? Have we become so desensitized to the language of violence that we no longer even hear it? What if we tried to describe being under pressure without resorting to a metaphor from a sniper's rifle? Number 17, would you rather be wounded or dead? The term is $1 million wound. It sounds like a terrible injury, But in the strange logic of war, it was a great thing. You know, $1 million wound was an injury that was serious enough to get you sent home away from the fighting, but not so serious that it would kill you or permanently disable you. A bullet in the foot or a piece of shrapnel in the arm. Something that would take you out of the war for good. It was your ticket home. Why $1 million? Because it felt like winning the lottery. For a soldier stuck in a foxhole facing death every day, the thought of getting home alive was a fantasy. $1 million wound made that fantasy real. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. The term reflects a deep-seated cynicism and a powerful survival instinct. Soldiers were not abstract heroes seeking glory. They were young men who wanted to live. As the war dragged on, the desire to simply survive trumped any notions of battlefield honor. The author and veteran Paul Fussell, in his book Wartime, talks extensively about this kind of thinking. He describes the intense, superstitious world of the frontline soldier, where luck was everything and survival was the only true victory. The medical system of the war made the $1 million wound possible. For the first time in a major conflict, medical care was incredibly effective. The widespread use of penicillin, which was mass-produced starting in 1944, and the availability of blood plasma meant that soldiers were surviving injuries that would have been fatal in the First World War. The chain of evacuation, from battlefield medics to aid stations to field hospitals, was highly organized. This meant that a non-critical but significant wound was very survivable. A soldier knew that if he got hit in the right way, he wouldn't die. He'd just go home. Of course, no one would openly admit to wanting to get wounded, but the thought was always there. Soldiers' diaries and letters are full of near misses and stories of friends who got lucky with a bloody wound, the British equivalent. The concept even entered the black market of the mind. There were persistent, though mostly unproven, rumors of soldiers intentionally shooting themselves in the foot. Such an act was a serious crime, but the desperation could be immense. After the war, the phrase lost some of its specific meaning. It lingered on as a piece of military lore, but the underlying idea of finding a fortunate escape from an unbearable situation is universal. We don't use the exact phrase much anymore, but the concept it represents is timeless. It's the ultimate example of gallows humor, of finding a silver lining in a traumatic event. It's a reminder that in the worst circumstances, the definition of good luck can become twisted in the extreme. How does the human mind recalibrate its definition of fortune in the face of constant mortal danger? If a wound is a winning lottery ticket, what does that say about the game being played? Are there modern equivalents of the $1 million wound in high-stress professions today, where a minor failure is secretly seen as a welcome escape? Number 16 is your situation a mess, or is it normal? The word is SNAFU. Like AWOL, it's an acronym. The polite version is situation normal all fouled up. The soldier's version, the real version, replaced fouled with a much stronger word. SNAFU wasn't just a word. It was a philosophy, it was a way of understanding the world. It perfectly captured the soldier's experience of the military. The sense that no matter what the plan was, things would go wrong, that the system was inherently chaotic, inefficient, and absurd. The term seems to have emerged in the US military around 1941. It spread like wildfire. Why? Because it was so true. Imagine you're told to move your platoon to a new position. You're given a map, but it's the wrong map. You're given a radio, but the batteries are dead. The trucks that are supposed to pick you up never arrive. That's the SNAFU. It's the gap between the grand, orderly plans made by generals and the messy, unpredictable reality faced by the grunts on the ground. It's the friction of war, the part that military theorists like Karl von Clausewitz wrote about, distilled into a single, crude, and funny word. The idea was so potent that it was even personified. In 1943, the U.S. War Department created a series of animated shorts for soldiers called Private SNAFU. These cartoons were directed by legendary animators like Chuck Jones and Fritz Verlang, with the voice of Mel Blanc, the voice of Bugs Bunny, and stories written by Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. Private SNAFU was an inept soldier who did everything wrong. He didn't clean his rifle, he leaked military secrets, he ignored safety rules. And he always paid the price. The cartoons were a way to teach soldiers what not to do, using humor. The very existence of this series shows how deeply the concept of SNAFU had penetrated the military consciousness. The high command knew that the soldiers felt the system was chaotic, so they co-opted the soldiers' own slang to try and impose some order. After the war, SNAFU entered the civilian world, especially in business and government. It was the perfect word for any bureaucratic mess. Of a project that's over budget and behind schedule. It's a SNAFU, a government agency that creates more problems than it solves. It's a classic SNAFU. The word carries with it a sense of weary resignation. It implies that the mess isn't just a one-time accident. It's the normal state of affairs. The situation normal part is the most cynical and most important part of the phrase. It says that chaos is the default setting. The enduring power of SNAFU is its honesty. It's a protest word. It's a small act of rebellion against the official story that everything is under control. It acknowledges the absurdity of large, complex organizations. It's a shared joke that helps people cope with powerlessness. Why do we find comfort in a word that declares our situation is hopelessly messed up? Does accepting chaos as normal make us more resilient, or does it make us more passive? If SNAFU was the unofficial motto of the war, what does that tell us about how massive conflicts are actually won? Number 15, are you escaping danger or just leaving? The phrase is bailout. When a company is in financial trouble, the government might bail it out. When you're in a boring conversation at a party, you might tell your friend you need to bail out. It means to leave a difficult or unpleasant situation, often with a sense of urgency. We use it all the time, for problems big and small. Its origin is from the world of military aviation, and it was a matter of life and death. For a pilot or crewman in a crippled airplane during the war, to bail out meant one thing: to strap on a parachute and jump from the dying aircraft. It was the last resort, the aircraft was doomed, and staying with it meant certain death. You had to abandon the machine to save yourself. It was a violent, terrifying act. Imagine climbing out of a cockpit or a gun turret into a screaming wind, thousands of feet in the air, with enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire all around you. The term itself is believed to come from the idea of bailing water out of a sinking boat. You're throwing something overboard to save the vessel. In this case, you are what's being thrown overboard to save yourself, while the vessel, the airplane, is lost. The parachute, a device that had existed for some time, became a standard piece of equipment for air crews during the war. The Caterpillar Club was an informal association of people whose lives had been saved by a parachute. It was founded in 1922 by Leslie Irvin of the Irvin Airchute Company. During the war, its membership swelled into the tens of thousands. Each successful bailout was a testament to this life-saving technology. The phrase jumped from the cockpit to the ground very quickly. The drama of it was irresistible. Newspapers reporting on air combat would describe crews bailing out over enemy territory. The image was seared into the public imagination. It was a perfect metaphor for any kind of desperate escape. By the late 1940s, people were using it to describe leaving a failing business or a bad relationship. The sense of crisis and last-ditch escape was still attached to it. Over time, the meaning has softened. Bailing out of a party isn't quite the same as jumping from a burning B-17 bomber, but a shadow of the original urgency remains. It's not just leaving, it's bailing out. The phrase implies that the situation you are leaving is bad, maybe even dangerous. We've kept the drama even when the stakes are much lower. It's a testament to how the high-stakes language of air combat captured a feeling we all experience the need to get out now. How much of our everyday language is borrowed from moments of extreme technological crisis? When we use a phrase like bailout, are we unconsciously tapping into the folk memory of the air war? What other life or death technical terms have we domesticated for our daily dramas? Number 14, are you correct or are you just following orders? The phrase is on the beam. To be on the beam means to be on the right track, to be thinking or acting correctly. If someone understands a complex idea, you might say, now you're on the beam. It's a phrase of encouragement and agreement. It implies precision and correctness. This phrase comes from the early days of radio navigation. During the war, especially for bomber aircraft flying long distances at night or in bad weather, navigation was a massive challenge. One of the key technologies developed to solve this was the radio beam. Systems like the Lorenz beam, used by the German Air Force, and similar systems developed by the Allies, transmitted a directional radio signal from a ground station. The signal was composed of two interlocking parts. If the pilot strayed to one side of the intended flight path, he would hear a series of Morse code dots in his headphones. If he strayed to the other side, he would hear dashes. When he was flying directly along the correct path, the dots and dashes would merge into a single, steady tone. That steady tone meant he was on the beam. For a bomber crew flying for hours in the dark over hostile territory, the sound of that steady tone was a lifeline. It was their only connection to safety and their only way of knowing they were heading toward their target. To be on the beam was to be safe, to be correct, to be doing the right thing. To drift off the beam was to be lost and in danger. The psychological importance of this technology cannot be overstated. It provided certainty in a world of terrifying uncertainty. The book A Higher Call by Adam Makos tells the incredible true story of a German pilot who chose not to shoot down a crippled American B-17 and instead guided it towards safety, a story deeply enmeshed with the challenges of navigation and survival. The metaphor was too perfect to stay in the cockpit. Soldiers and sailors picked it up from the airmen. It spread rapidly. To be on the beam was a clear, simple way to say that someone was right. It had a technological, modern feel to it. After the war, it entered the general vocabulary as a common idiom. It was particularly popular in the 1950s and 60s, a time when society valued conformity and doing things the right way. To be on the beam was to be in tune with the correct way of thinking. Today, the phrase feels a little dated, a bit like something your grandfather might say, but we still understand it. The underlying metaphor of a guiding signal that keeps us on the correct path is still powerful. We no longer rely on radio beams for navigation, we have GPS, but the linguistic ghost of that old technology remains. It's a fossil in our language, a memory of a time when a simple tone in a pair of headphones could be the difference between life and death. What other forgotten technologies are hiding in our common phrases? Does our reliance on precise, invisible guidance systems like GPS make it harder for us to understand metaphors like being on the beam? If being on the beam means being correct, what does it mean for our creativity and independence when we are always trying to stay on someone else's beam? Number 13, was it a failure or just a disappointment? The word is dude. We call a firecracker that doesn't go off a dud. A party that's no fun is a dud. A movie that bombs at the box office is a dud. It means a failure, something that doesn't work as expected, a disappointment. It's a short, blunt, dismissive word. Its modern meaning was forged in the explosive reality of the Second World War. A dud was a bomb, an artillery shell, or any piece of ordnance that failed to detonate. For soldiers on the receiving end of a bombardment, the sound of a shell thudding into the earth nearby without exploding was a moment of pure, miraculous relief. It was a gift from fate. For the people who fired the weapon, it was a failure of technology and a waste of resources. The war involved the production of billions of rounds of ammunition and millions of bombs. The scale of manufacturing was unprecedented. And with that scale came a certain rate of failure. The science of fusing, the mechanism that detonates an explosive is incredibly complex. A fuse has to be safe enough to handle and transport, but sensitive enough to go off at the exact right moment. During the war, engineers worked frantically to perfect these devices, but things go wrong. A manufacturing defect, damage in transit, a faulty design. The result was a dud. Bomb disposal units, both military and civilian, had the terrifying job of dealing with these unexploded duds. In cities like London during the Blitz, these teams were heroes. They had to disarm bombs that could go off at any second. The film The English Patient, based on the novel by Michael Ondaatje, features a main character who is a sapper, or combat engineer, whose job includes defusing unexploded ordnance, highlighting the intense danger of the dud. The word ud itself is older, likely dating back to the 14th century, where it referred to shabby clothing. But the war gave it its primary modern meaning. The experience of a bomb failing to explode was so common and so dramatic that the word became permanently attached to this specific kind of failure. A dud wasn't just broken, it was a promise of violence that went unfulfilled. After the war, the term was applied to any kind of failure. It was a useful word because it was so absolute. There's no partial dud. It either works or it doesn't. It's a binary state of failure. This is why it works so well for movies or parties. It delivers a final, damning judgment. It failed. The end. The association with explosives gives it a little extra punch. A dud isn't just a quiet failure, it's a loud potential that fizzled out. How did a word for old clothes become a word for an unexploded bomb? What is the journey of a word like? Do tell us about how our anxieties change over time, from social appearance to physical annihilation. In an age of digital failures and for 104 errors, is the concept of a physical dud becoming a historical curiosity. Number 12, are you taking a risk or are you fighting for your life? The phrase is go for broke. It means to risk everything on one single, decisive effort, to bet all your money, to put all your energy into one final attempt. It's a phrase of high stakes, all or nothing commitment. We use it in sports, in business, in gambling. It's the language of desperation and daring. This phrase became famous because of a specific group of soldiers, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. This unit was composed almost entirely of Japanese-American soldiers. Many of them had volunteered from internment camps where their families were being held by the U.S. government following the attack on Pearl Harbor. They were men fighting for a country that had imprisoned them. They had everything to prove. Their motto was, go for broke. In Hawaiian Pidgin, the local slang many of them grew up with, it was a gambling term. It meant to wager everything. The 442nd fought in Europe, primarily in Italy and France. They became the most decorated unit of their size and length of service in the history of the U.S. military. They were sent on the most dangerous missions, the ones no one else wanted. Their casualty rate was astronomical. In one famous engagement in October 1944, they were ordered to rescue the Lost Battalion, a Texas unit that had been cut off and surrounded by German forces in the Vosges Mountains of France. Over 5 days of brutal fighting, the 442nd suffered over 800 casualties to rescue 211 men. They lived their motto. They went for broke again and again. The story of the 442nd is one of the most powerful and complex stories of the war. Their bravery was a direct challenge to the prejudice they faced at home. Senator Daniel Inouye, who lost an arm fighting with the 442nd and later became a U.S. Senator, was one of its many heroes. Their story was told in the 1951 film Go for Broke, which helped to cement the phrase in the American vocabulary. The phrase became synonymous with incredible courage and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. When we use the phrase today, we rarely think of this history. We use it to describe a risky business move or a final play in a football game. The life and death context is gone, but the core meaning remains to risk it all. The story of the 442nd gave the phrase a moral weight and a historical resonance that it didn't have as a simple gambling term. It was baptized in blood. It's not just about taking a risk, it's about committing completely to a cause, even when the personal cost is devastatingly high. How does a phrase from a specific subculture like Hawaiian Pidgin become a national motto of courage? Does the casual modern use of go for broke diminish the incredible sacrifice of the soldiers who adopted it as their creed? What other stories of marginalized groups are hidden within the slang we use every day? Number 11, do you have nothing or do you have less than nothing? The word is zilch. It means nothing, zero, nada. If you have no money, you have zilch. If you know nothing about a subject, you know zilch. You know, it's an informal, slightly dismissive word for absolute nothingness. It has a funny sound to it, which makes it satisfying to say. The origin of zilch is a bit of a mystery, but its popularity took off during and after the Second World War. The most common theory connects it to a character in a popular humor magazine. In the 1930s, the magazine Ballyhoo featured a running gag about a Mr. Zilch. He was a generic, unremarkable person. The name was chosen because it sounded funny and insignificant. The magazine was very popular on college campuses and among young people, the same demographic that would soon be filling the ranks of the military. When these young men went to war, they took their slang with them. Zilch was the perfect word for the military experience. How much mail did you get today? Zilch. What are our chances of getting a hot meal? Zilch. It captured the sense of deprivation and anonymity that was a part of daily life for many soldiers. It was a more colorful, more final sounding word than just nothing. You know, it had an attitude. One strong piece of evidence for its military popularization comes from the U.S. Navy. The word appears frequently in publications for sailors and in slang dictionaries compiled during the war. It was often used to refer to a recruit or someone of low rank and no importance. Joe Zilch was a nobody. From there, it came to mean the quantity of importance or value that such a person possessed zero. Eric Partridge, the great lexicographer of slang, noted its rise in his A Dictionary of Slang and Unconventional English, tracing its explosion in use to the armed forces in the early 1940s. After the war, the veterans brought the word home and it seeped into the general language. It was a fresh, new-sounding word, and people liked it. It had a bit of a cynical, world-weary edge that fit the post-war mood. By the 1960s, it was a completely standard part of informal American English. We've forgotten all about Mr. Zilch from Ballyhoo magazine. The word now stands on its own. It's a great example of how slang can bubble up from a very specific source, get supercharged by a major historical event, and then become a normal part of the language, its origins completely erased. Why are some nonsense-sounding words like zilch so successful while others disappear? Is there a hidden logic to the sounds we associate with nothingness? What other forgotten magazine characters or comic strips have secretly shaped the words we use? Number 10. Was he really here? The phrase is Kilroy was here. It's not a word, but a meme. It's the original viral graffiti. A simple chalk or crayon drawing of a bald-headed man with a big nose peeking over a wall, with the words Kilroy was here written next to it. During the war, this image appeared everywhere American soldiers went. On crates in the Pacific, on walls in newly liberated French towns, on dusty trucks in North Africa. It showed up in the most unlikely and inaccessible places. It was an inside joke for an entire army. The origins of Kilroy are debated, a testament to its folkloric nature. The most widely accepted story centers on a man named James J. Kilroy, who worked as a rivet inspector at the Four River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts during the war. Ships were being built at an incredible speed. To keep track of which sections he had inspected, he would write Kilroy was here in yellow crayon on the metal plates. The ships were then sealed up and sent to war. Soldiers, sailors, and Marines working deep inside these new ships would find the mysterious phrase written in places that were impossible to reach. It must have seemed like a ghost had been there. They started copying the phrase and the drawing as a joke. It became a competition to see who could put Kilroy in the most outrageous location. The Kilroy phenomenon was a way for soldiers to leave their mark, to say, I exist in a world that was trying to erase them. It was a small act of defiance against the anonymity of war. It connected millions of soldiers who would never meet. Seeing a Kilroy drawing in a strange new place was a reminder that another American had been there before you. It was a message of solidarity. It drove outsiders crazy. There are stories, possibly apocryphal, of enemy intelligence officers trying to figure out who this Kilroy was, thinking he must be a master spy. The phenomenon was documented by newspapers and magazines at the time. The New York Times Magazine ran an article on it in 1946 trying to solve the mystery. The Kilroy meme demonstrated a very human need, the desire for presence and recognition. In a conflict of unimaginable scale, the individual could feel completely lost. Kilroy was a way to push back. After the war, the Kilroy meme faded from common use, but it never completely disappeared. It became a symbol of the war generation itself. It pops up in popular culture as a nod to that era. It's arguably the first great meme of the modern media age, spreading virally without any central control. It was user-generated content before the internet even existed. It was a quiet, humorous, and deeply human response to a world gone mad. What is the deep psychological need that drives us to write "I was here" on things? Could a meme like Kilroy spread so far and so fast today, or has the internet paradoxically made the world too big for a single, unifying piece of graffiti? Are there modern digital Kilroys that we are not even recognizing as such? Number 9, do you understand or do you acknowledge? The word is Roger, as in Roger that, or just Roger. It means I have received and understood your message. It's a staple of movies about pilots and astronauts. It sounds cool, professional, and efficient. It's the language of people who can't afford to be misunderstood. The origin lies in the history of communication technology. In the early days of radio and telegraphy, signal quality was often terrible. Static, interference, and weak signals made it hard to hear. Misunderstanding a single word could be catastrophic. To deal with this, military and civilian communicators developed standardized procedures and phonetic alphabets. A phonetic alphabet replaces letters with words to avoid confusion. A becomes Abel, B becomes Bakar, C becomes Charlie, and so on. This was crucial for spelling out important information over a crackly radio link. In the U.S. military's phonetic alphabet used during the war, the Abel-Baker alphabet, the word for the letter R was Roger. The letter R itself was shorthand. It stood for received. So when a radio operator received a message, instead of saying received, which could be garbled, he would say Roger. It was clearer, more distinct, and less likely to be mistaken for another word. It didn't just mean I heard you. It meant I have received your message and I understand it. It was a confirmation, a loop had been closed. The massive expansion of radio use during the war, especially in aircraft and tanks, meant that millions of service members were trained to use this language. Roger, Wilco for will comply, and other radio-specific terms became second nature. For pilots flying in formation or soldiers coordinating an attack, this clear, concise language was essential for survival. The history of the Army Signal Corps is filled with accounts of the struggle to maintain communication lines and the constant innovation in radio technology that was a hallmark of the war effort. After the war, this bit of specialized jargon entered the mainstream. It had an aura of high-tech competence and military precision. It sounded cool. The space race in the 1950s and 60s gave it another boost. The Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts, all former military test pilots, used the same language. Roger, tranquility. We copy you on the ground. Neil Armstrong's voice from the moon made Roger a household word. Today, we use it more loosely. Can you pick up milk on the way home? Roger that. We're not confirming receipt of a radio transmission. We're just saying okay, or I will. But we're borrowing a little bit of that pilot's coolness when we do it. It's another example of how the specialized, high-stakes language of war becomes the casual slang of peacetime. Why did Roger for receive catch-on, while other phonetic alphabet words didn't become standalone verbs? Does our use of precise, technical jargon in casual conversation reflect a desire for order and control in a chaotic world? What future technologies are creating specialized languages today that our grandchildren will use as slang tomorrow? Number 8. Are you enthusiastic or are you a true believer? The phrase is gung-ho. To be gung-ho is to be overly enthusiastic, zealous, and eager, especially for a fight. Sometimes it's a compliment, meaning you're dedicated and motivated. Other times it's an insult, meaning you're naively and perhaps dangerously overeager. It has a double-edged meaning. The phrase comes from Chinese. It's a shortening of the term gonye hezuashe, which means industrial cooperative. During the war with Japan, this was the name of a movement to organize small, decentralized workshops to support the Chinese war effort. The idea was to create a spirit of teamwork and harmony to get the job done. So how did a Chinese term for industrial cooperation become an American slang word for aggressive enthusiasm? The connection is a man named Evans Carlson, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps. Carlson had served as a military observer in China in the late 1930s. He was incredibly impressed by the spirit and tactics of the Chinese Communist forces fighting the Japanese. He saw their gonghi spirit of working together in harmony and believed it could be adapted for the Marines. When the U.S. entered the war, Carlson was given command of the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion. These were elite commando units. Carlson decided to organize his battalion along the principles he had learned in China. He flattened the command structure, treated officers and enlisted men more like equals, and held gung-ho meetings where everyone could voice their opinions and work together to solve problems. He wanted his men to understand why they were fighting. He adopted gung-ho as the battalion's slogan. It meant work together. Carlson's raiders were highly effective, most famously in the raid on Makin Island in 1942. But his methods were controversial with the traditional Marine Corps leadership. They didn't like his egalitarian approach. However, his men, known as the Gung-Ho Battalion, became famous. The press loved the story. The phrase gung-ho captured the public's imagination. But as the story was told and retold, the original meaning of work together was lost. It was replaced with a new meaning, based on the fierce, almost fanatical fighting reputation of the raiders. Gung-ho came to mean the spirit of the raiders themselves, aggressive, zealous, and ready for a fight. After the war, the new meaning stuck. It became a permanent part of the language, forever disconnected from its cooperative origins. The 1943 film Gung-Ho, starring Randolph Scott, told a fictionalized version of the Makin Island raid and helped solidify the new meaning in the public mind. It's a fascinating case of a loan word being completely misunderstood and repurposed. How can the meaning of a word be flipped from cooperation to unthinking aggression in just a few years? What does the story of gung-ho tell us about how we mythologize our military heroes? Are there other words we use that have a completely different or even opposite meaning in their original language? Number 7. Is it important or is it the most important? The term is D-Day. When we hear it, we think of one specific day, June 6, 1944, the day the Allies landed in Normandy, the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. It has become a proper noun, a name for one of the most significant and dramatic events of the 20th century. But D-Day didn't originally refer to that day. It was, and still is, a generic military term. D simply stands for day. It's a placeholder. When military planners are creating an operation, they don't know the exact date it will launch until the last minute. The date depends on weather, logistics, enemy movements, so in the plan, they refer to the day of the invasion as D-Day. The day before is ED-1. The day after is ED+1. The time the operation begins is called Edge H hour. This allows them to create a detailed timeline for the entire operation long before the actual date is set. Every major military operation has a D-Day. The invasion of Normandy, codenamed Operation Overlord, was the largest amphibious invasion in history. Nearly 160,000 soldiers crossed the English Channel on the first day. Thousands of ships and aircraft were involved. The planning was incredibly complex, involving years of preparation and deception. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, made the final difficult decision to launch the invasion on June 6th, despite concerns about the weather. Because this particular D-Day was so enormous, so consequential, and so heavily reported, its name stuck. It became the D-Day. No one talks about the D-Day for the invasion of Sicily or the D-Day for the invasion of Iwo Jima. The Normandy landings were so massive that they claimed a generic term for themselves. It's a linguistic monument to the scale and importance of that one day. After the war, the term D-Day entered the civilian vocabulary as a metaphor for any important, decisive deadline or event. The day a new product is launched might be called D-Day by the marketing team. The day of a final exam can feel like D-Day for a student. We use it to add a sense of drama and finality to our own deadlines. We are borrowing the weight of history to make our own plans seem more important. It's a testament to how deeply the memory of the Normandy invasion is embedded in our collective culture. Why did this specific placeholder name become so iconic, while others like H hour remain technical jargon? Does using D-Day to describe a product launch trivialize the memory of the soldiers who fought and died on the beaches of Normandy? What will be the D-Day of our current generation? The event so large it redefines a common word. Number 6. What does a car have to do with a comic strip? The word is Jeep. It's one of the most recognizable brand names in the world, a symbol of rugged off-road adventure. But the original Jeep was not a consumer product. It was a weapon of war. A small, tough, four-wheel drive vehicle that could go anywhere and do anything. The war correspondent, Ernie Pyle, who wrote so movingly about the common soldier, said of the Jeep, "It did everything. It went everywhere, was as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat." The U.S. Army knew it needed a light reconnaissance vehicle. In 1940, it issued a daunting set of specifications to 135 different manufacturers. The vehicle had to be four-wheel drive, have a crew of 3, and be extremely light, weighing no more than 1,300 pounds. Only 2 companies responded seriously, the tiny American Bantam Car Company and the more established Willys Overland. Bantam designed the prototype, but the Army, fearing Bantam was too small to produce the numbers needed, gave the contracts to Willys Overland and Ford. Over 640,000 of these vehicles were built during the war. But where did the name Jeep come from? There are 2 main theories, and the truth is probably a mix of both. The first is that it's a slurring of the letters GP, the military designation for the vehicle. GP stood for general purpose. Say GP fast enough, and it starts to sound like Jeep. This is the official, logical explanation. The second, more fun theory comes from a popular comic strip of the time, Thimble Theater starring Popeye. In 1936, the cartoonist E.C. Sagar introduced a new character named Again the Jeep. The Jeep was a magical, dog-like creature from another dimension. It could walk through walls, teleport, and solve any problem. Its only sound was Jeep Jeep. This character was incredibly popular. The theory goes that the soldiers, amazed by the new vehicle's ability to go anywhere and do anything, nicknamed it the Yeep after this magical creature. Whichever story is true, the name stuck. The vehicle was officially called the Willys MB or the Ford GPW, but everyone called it a Jeep. It was one of the most important pieces of equipment the Allies had. It served as a scout car, an ambulance, a tractor for artillery, a staff car. It was a symbol of American industrial power and ingenuity. After the war, Willys Overland trademarked the name and began selling a civilian version, the CJ2A, to farmers and ranchers. The Jeep brand was born. It successfully made the transition from a tool of war to a symbol of freedom and adventure. It's a rare case of a piece of military hardware becoming a beloved cultural icon. How can the true origin of such a famous name remain a mystery? What does it say about the soldier's mindset that they might name a piece of machinery after a magical cartoon animal? What other iconic products of our daily lives began as secret, unglamorous tools of war? Number 5. Are you taking criticism or are you under fire? The word is flack. We talk about taking flack for a decision. A politician catches flack for a controversial vote. It means to receive heavy, intense criticism. It's a strong word for being attacked verbally. The origin is German, and it's brutally literal. Flak is a contraction of the German word Fliegerwehrkanone, which means aircraft defense cannon. It's the word for an anti-aircraft gun. So for Allied bomber crews flying over Europe, flak was the thousands of explosive shells being fired at them from the ground. A sky full of flak was a terrifying sight. It appeared as black puffs of smoke, each one marking a shell burst. A direct hit could tear a plane apart. Even a near miss could send hot shards of metal shrapnel 6 ripping through the thin aluminum skin of the aircraft, wounding the crew and damaging critical systems. The experience of flying through flak was one of the defining horrors of the air war. Crews had to fly straight and level on their bombing runs, right through the thickest concentrations of it. They couldn't take evasive action, they just had to endure it. The writer Joseph Heller, who was a bombardier in the war, captured the terror and absurdity of this experience in his classic novel, Catch-22. The constant impersonal threat of flak was a major theme of the book. It was a deadly mechanical danger that you were powerless to fight against. The word flak came into English directly from the pilots and air crews. They would talk about heavy flak over a target in their debriefings. The reporters picked up the word and it began appearing in newspaper articles. It was a short, sharp, ugly sounding word, and it perfectly captured the nature of the thing it described. After the war, the metaphor was just too good to pass up. The experience of being under a barrage of criticism felt a lot like flying through a sky full of explosions. The first figurative uses of flak started appearing in the 1960s. A public figure under attack from the press was taking flak. The metaphor stuck. It's so common now that we don't even think of it as a metaphor anymore, but every time we use it, we are invoking the memory of those young men and their bombers staring out at a sky filled with black puffs of death. Why do we so often turn to the language of aerial bombardment to describe our social and political conflicts? Does using a word like flak to describe mean tweets or bad reviews create a culture of exaggerated victimhood? What other foreign military terms have we adopted into English without a second thought? Number 4, is it a bad letter? Or is it the end of your world? The phrase is a Dear John letter. It's a cultural shorthand. Everyone knows what it means. It's a letter, now more likely an email or a text, from a romantic partner who is ending the relationship. Specifically, it's a letter sent to a soldier who is deployed far from home. It is the ultimate morale killer. While the idea of a soldier getting dumped via mail is as old as armies, the specific phrase, Dear John letter, comes from the Second World War. Millions of young American men were sent overseas, many for years at a time. They left behind wives and girlfriends. The only connection they had was through letters. Mail call was the most important event of the day. A letter from home was a lifeline, a reminder of the world they were fighting to get back to, but long separations put an incredible strain on relationships. People changed. The woman back home, who might be working in a factory and living a new independent life, might find it hard to wait. The soldier, traumatized by war, was no longer the same boy who left. Relationships fell apart, and the news often came in the mail. The letters almost always started the same way, Dear John. It was a formal, impersonal sounding salutation. When a soldier saw those two words, his heart would sink. He knew what was coming next. The phrase became a bitter joke in the barracks. Looks like old Bill got a Dear John today. The phenomenon was so widespread that the military and civilian authorities were genuinely concerned about it. Magazines from the period, like the Saturday Evening Post, ran articles and cartoons about it. The military's own newspaper, Stars and Stripes, made frequent references to it. It was a recognized and feared part of the wartime experience. It wasn't just about a broken heart. For a soldier in a combat zone, a Dear John letter could be devastating to his mental state, affecting his focus and his will to survive. It was a wound that no medic could fix. After the war, the phrase became a permanent part of the American idiom. It perfectly captured a very specific and painful type of romantic rejection. The name John was used simply because it was one of the most common American male names. Any soldier could be John. The country singer Hank Williams released a song called Dear John in 1951, which helped to popularize the term even further. Today, the context has changed, but the phrase endures. It's a piece of social history preserved in slang. It's a reminder of a time when love and war were tangled together, not just in metaphor, but in the very real and painful reality of a letter in the mail. What was the psychological impact of receiving such devastating news in a place where emotional support was almost non-existent? Dear John letters were written not out of malice, but out of the sheer impossibility of maintaining a relationship across the Gulf of War. Is there a modern equivalent to the Dear John letter in our age of instant digital communication? Number 3, was it a big movie, or did it destroy a city block? The word is blockbuster. Today, a blockbuster is a huge, successful movie. A summer blockbuster is a big-budget film that draws massive crowds and makes hundreds of millions of dollars. We also use it for best-selling books or hit songs. It means a smash hit. It's a positive, exciting word. The original blockbusters were not exciting in a good way. They were terrifying. A blockbuster was a type of aerial bomb used by the British Royal Air Force. Specifically, it was a very large, high-capacity bomb designed not to penetrate deeply, but to explode at the surface and destroy a huge area with its blast wave. The goal was to literally bust an entire city block, blowing the roofs off buildings and shattering windows for hundreds of yards. These bombs, officially called high-capacity bombs, were nicknamed cookies or blockbusters. The largest ones weighed up to 12,000 pounds. The purpose of the blockbuster was grim. It was a key part of the area bombing strategy employed by RAF Bomber Command under Arthur Bomber Harris. The idea was to destroy the enemy's industrial capacity by destroying the cities where the factories and workers were located. A typical bombing raid would involve dropping blockbusters first to open up the buildings. These would be followed by waves of smaller incendiary bombs, which could then fall into the wrecked buildings and start uncontrollable firestorms. The results were devastating. The word blockbuster started appearing in newspapers in 1942 to describe these new, powerful bombs and the destruction they caused. The public was both fascinated and horrified by the power of this new weapon. The name was catchy and descriptive. It conveyed the immense destructive force of the bomb in a simple, 2-syllable word. After the war, the word was still in the public consciousness, associated with something of immense power and impact. Around 1950, entertainment journalists started using it metaphorically. A movie with a huge budget, big stars, and massive box office returns was like a blockbuster bomb. It had a huge impact. It wiped out the competition. The first films to be called blockbusters were expensive epics like Quo Vadis or The Ten Commandments. The term really took off in the 1970s with the release of films like Jaws and Star Wars, which redefined the movie business. This is one of the strangest semantic shifts in the language. A word for a weapon of mass destruction, a tool designed to obliterate civilian neighborhoods, has become our word for fun, popular entertainment. We have completely forgotten the origin. We have stripped the word of its horror and kept only its power. What does it say about us that we so easily converted a term for urban destruction into a term for popular art? Are there other words we use that have similarly dark and violent origins we've chosen to forget? What happens to our understanding of history when the language of war becomes the language of entertainment? Number 2, is it a mess or is it a total catastrophe? The word is FUBAR. It is the big brother of SNAFU. Like SNAFU, it is a military acronym. It stands for Fooled Up Beyond All Recognition. And just like SNAFU, soldiers had a more forceful, less polite word they used for fooled. FUBAR is what happens after a SNAFU gets worse, and then gets worse again. It's not just a mess. It's a state of complete and utter chaos, a situation so hopelessly screwed up that it can't be fixed. It is the endpoint of military disaster. If SNAFU is situation normal, FUBAR is the recognition that the situation has gone off the rails completely. It's a term of ultimate despair and cynicism. It emerged in the U.S. military around 1944 as the war was reaching its most intense and costly phase. It reflects the feelings of soldiers who had seen it all and had no illusions left. It's the language of a survivor, not a hero. Or it's the black humor that people use to cope when they are in an impossible situation with no control over their own fate. The historian Paul Fussell argues that this kind of slang was essential for soldiers' mental survival. Its official language was full of euphemisms for death and destruction, words like sanitizing an area or collateral damage. Soldiers needed their own language, a language that was honest, crude, and funny, to describe the reality of what they were seeing. Fubar was a perfect example. It was a small way of talking back to the chaos, of naming it, and in doing so, gaining some small measure of control over it. It was a way of saying, this is insane, but I see it for what it is. The term got a major boost in popular culture from the 1998 film Saving Private Ryan. In a key scene, as the soldiers are surveying a scene of total destruction, one of them explains the meaning of Fubar to an inexperienced comrade. The scene perfectly captures the word's meaning and its function as a piece of cynical, soldierly wisdom. The film introduced the word to a whole new generation who had never heard it before. Today, Fubar is used in business and technology to describe a project that has failed spectacularly. A software launch that is full of bugs and crashes everyone's computer is Fubar. A corporate merger that results in total chaos is Fubar. It has retained its meaning of a catastrophe that is beyond repair. It is a stronger, more absolute word than SNAFU. When you declare something Fubar, you are essentially giving up on it. There is no hope of recovery. It has reached a state of terminal messiness. Why do we need a hierarchy of terms for failure, from a simple mistake to SNAFU to Fubar? Does having a word for a hopeless situation make it easier to accept? What does the journey of a word like Fubar from the battlefield to the boardroom tell us about the nature of modern work? Number 1, what do you call the monster in the machine? The word is gremlin. A gremlin is a mischievous creature that causes mechanical or electrical problems. If your car won't start for no reason, you might have a gremlin in the engine. If your computer keeps crashing, it's a gremlin in the system. It's a folkloric explanation for the mysterious, frustrating failures of modern technology. The idea of the gremlin was born in the Royal Air Force in the 1920s, with pilots stationed in the Middle East and India. But it was during the Second World War that the concept truly took off. The war saw a massive leap forward in the complexity of technology, especially in aircraft. A bomber like a B-17 was a fantastically complicated machine with miles of wiring, hydraulic lines, and sensitive instruments. And things were always going wrong, often for no apparent reason. An engine would inexplicably fail. A machine gun would jam at a critical moment. The radio would fill with static. The pilots and air crews needed something to blame. So they invented the gremlin. Gremlins were little imps who lived on the airplanes and delighted in causing trouble. They would drink the fuel, cut the wires, and poke holes in the wings. They were a personification of the inexplicable malice of inanimate objects. Blaming a gremlin was a way of coping with the constant stress and uncertainty of relying on complex and sometimes unreliable technology. It was a joke, but it was a serious one. It was a piece of modern folklore created on the fly to explain a modern problem. The idea was so pervasive that it caught the attention of the author Roald Dahl. Dahl was a fighter pilot for the RAF during the war. He was seriously injured in a crash in Libya. While recovering, he wrote his first children's book, The Gremlins, which was published in 1943. The book was supposed to be developed into an animated film by Walt Disney. The film was never made, but the book and the associated publicity helped to introduce the concept of the gremlin to the American public. Articles about gremlins appeared in magazines, and they were featured in cartoons, including one with Bugs Bunny called Falling Hair. After the war, the term stuck around. As technology became more and more a part of everyday life, the need for gremlins grew. Anytime a machine acts up in a way we don't understand, we can blame a gremlin. It's a more satisfying explanation than intermittent fault in the printed circuit board. It gives a personality to the frustrating randomness of mechanical failure. It turns a technical problem into a story. It's a small pocket of magic and myth surviving in our highly rational technological world. Why, in an age of science and engineering, do we still feel the need to invent mythical creatures to explain technological failures? What does the story of the gremlin tell us about the relationship between humans and their complex machines? Are we still inventing new kinds of gremlins for the mysterious problems of the digital age, and we just haven't named them yet?